Tonight, we begin a gentle journey into one of the most profound mysteries that science has ever encountered. Something so intimate, so immediate, that you're experiencing it right now, in this very moment, as these words reach your awareness. Yet despite being the most familiar aspect of your existence, consciousness remains one of the deepest puzzles in all of science. Close your eyes if you'd like, and let yourself settle into this exploration. There's no need to rush, no complex equations to memorize, no startling revelations to brace yourself for. Just a calm, thoughtful walk through what we know, what we think we know, and what we're still discovering about the gentle phenomenon that makes you, you. What exactly do we mean when we talk about consciousness? In the simplest terms, consciousness is your subjective, first-person experience of being aware. It's the feeling of what it's like to be you. When you see the color red, there's something it feels like to experience that redness. When you taste chocolate, there's a particular quality to that sweetness. When you feel sad or joyful, there's an inner texture to those emotions that belongs entirely to you. Scientists often use the term phenomenal consciousness to describe this rich, subjective experience. It encompasses everything from the immediate sensation of warmth on your skin to the complex awareness of your own thoughts and feelings. This isn't just information processing, though that's certainly part of it. This is the mysterious emergence of inner experience, the gentle lighting up of awareness that accompanies your daily life. Now, before we go any further, let's pause and acknowledge something important. Despite decades of research, thousands of scientific papers, and the brilliant work of countless neuroscientists, psychologists, and philosophers, we still don't fully understand what consciousness actually is. Science has made remarkable progress in mapping the brain, understanding neural networks, and identifying the biological processes that seem to accompany conscious experience. But the fundamental question of how physical processes in the brain give rise to subjective experience remains beautifully, mysteriously unanswered. This isn't a failure of science. It's simply recognition that consciousness might be the most complex phenomenon in the known universe. And there's something oddly comforting in that acknowledgement. In a world where we often expect instant answers, consciousness reminds us that some mysteries unfold slowly, gently, requiring patience and humility. Let's start with what we do know, beginning with the basic architecture of awareness itself. Scientists have discovered that consciousness isn't a single, unified process. Instead, it appears to emerge from the coordinated activity of multiple brain systems working together in elegant harmony. Think of your brain as a vast orchestra, with billions of neurons playing their individual parts. But unlike a traditional orchestra with a single conductor, your brain creates consciousness through the spontaneous coordination of many different sections, each contributing their unique voice to the overall symphony of awareness. The foundation of this symphony lies in what neuroscientists call the neural correlates of consciousness. These are the minimal sets of brain processes that seem to be necessary for conscious experience to occur. Recent research suggests that these correlates are primarily located in what scientists call the posterior cortical regions, areas toward the back of your brain that include sensory processing areas. This discovery has been quietly revolutionary. For many years, researchers thought that consciousness was primarily generated by the frontal regions of the brain, those areas associated with complex thinking and decision-making. But careful studies using brain imaging and other techniques have revealed that conscious experience seems to emerge more from the posterior regions, while the frontal areas appear more involved in what we might call the management and reporting of consciousness rather than consciousness itself. Imagine consciousness as a gentle glow emanating from the back of your brain, where sensory information is processed and integrated. This glow then spreads forward, illuminating your thoughts and enabling you to reflect on and report your experiences. It's a beautiful image, and while it's simplified, it captures something essential about how awareness seems to unfold in the brain. But what exactly is happening in these posterior regions? Here's where the story becomes even more fascinating. Your brain is constantly receiving vast amounts of sensory information from your environment. Light waves entering your eyes, sound waves reaching your ears, pressure and temperature changes touching your skin, chemical signals reaching your nose and tongue. At any given moment, millions of these signals are flooding into your nervous system, yet you're not consciously aware of most of this information. Your brain is performing an extraordinary act of selection and integration, choosing which signals to bring into conscious awareness and weaving them together into your unified experience of the present moment. This process happens through what scientists call global workspace theory. Imagine your brain as a vast theatre, with most of the action happening backstage, in darkness. Only a small portion of all the mental activity occurring in your brain makes it onto the brightly lit stage of consciousness. Once information reaches this global workspace, it becomes available to many different brain systems simultaneously, allowing for the rich, integrated experience of conscious awareness. The selection process is remarkably sophisticated. Your brain is constantly evaluating the relevance, importance, and coherence of incoming information. Signals that are novel, emotionally significant, or relevant to your current goals are more likely to make it into conscious awareness. Meanwhile, predictable or irrelevant information is processed unconsciously, freeing up the precious resources of consciousness for what matters most. This is why you can drive a familiar route while lost in thought, your unconscious mind handling the routine aspects of steering and navigation while your consciousness is occupied elsewhere. It's why you suddenly notice your name being mentioned in a crowded room, even though you weren't consciously listening to that conversation. Your brain is constantly monitoring and filtering, bringing the most relevant information into the gentle spotlight of awareness. But consciousness involves more than just selecting and integrating sensory information. Another crucial component is what neuroscientists call the neural integration of information across different brain regions. For conscious experience to emerge, different parts of your brain need to communicate and coordinate their activities in complex patterns. This coordination happens through neural oscillations, rhythmic patterns of electrical activity that allow different brain regions to synchronize their processing. These oscillations occur at different frequencies, from slow delta waves during deep sleep to faster gamma waves associated with conscious awareness. When these oscillations are properly coordinated across different brain regions, consciousness emerges. When they become disrupted, as happens during anesthesia or certain types of brain injury, consciousness fades. The timing of this coordination is exquisitely precise, occurring in milliseconds. Yet the subjective experience feels seamless and continuous. Your brain is performing an extraordinary feat of temporal integration, binding together information that arrives at slightly different times into a unified experience of the present moment. This brings us to one of the most intriguing aspects of consciousness research. Consciousness isn't actually continuous, even though it feels that way. Instead, conscious perception unfolds in discrete moments, like frames in a movie that create the illusion of smooth motion when played in sequence. These moments of conscious awareness last roughly 1/10 of a second each, during which your brain integrates information and creates a unified perceptual experience. Between these moments, there are brief gaps where conscious processing is reduced or absent entirely. But your brain seamlessly fills in these gaps, creating the impression of continuous awareness. It's similar to how your brain fills in the blind spot in your vision, where the optic nerve connects to your retina. You're not aware of the gap because your brain creates a seamless experience. This temporal structure of consciousness has profound implications for understanding how awareness works. It suggests that consciousness is not a steady stream, but rather a series of discrete moments of awareness, each one carefully constructed by your brain from available information and then seamlessly woven together into the fabric of your ongoing experience. Now, let's explore how different aspects of consciousness relate to each other. Scientists distinguish between several different types or levels of awareness, each with their own characteristics and neural correlates. The most basic level is simple wakefulness, or arousal. This is the difference between being asleep and being awake, between being alert and being in a coma. Arousal is primarily controlled by structures in the brainstem, ancient regions that regulate basic life functions. When these systems are functioning normally, they maintain the level of brain activity necessary for consciousness to emerge. But wakefulness alone isn't enough for consciousness. You can be awake but not aware, as sometimes happens in certain medical conditions. This brings us to the next level, which is awareness itself. Awareness involves the capacity to respond to and process information from your environment. When you're aware, your brain is actively processing sensory information and can respond appropriately to changes in your surroundings. Above awareness lies self-awareness, the capacity to recognize yourself as a distinct entity, separate from your environment. Self-awareness allows you to reflect on your own thoughts and experiences, to recognize yourself in a mirror, and to understand that you have a continuous identity that persists through time. These different levels of consciousness can be dissociated from each other. Brain imaging studies have shown that patients in vegetative states may show signs of arousal and even some forms of awareness, but lack the higher-order self-awareness that characterizes normal consciousness. Other patients may retain self-awareness but have specific deficits in processing certain types of sensory information. This layered structure of consciousness reflects the evolutionary development of the brain. The basic arousal systems evolved first, followed by increasingly sophisticated systems for processing and integrating information. Self-awareness appears to be a relatively recent evolutionary development, present in only a few species and dependent on the most recently evolved regions of the brain. Understanding these different levels helps us appreciate the complexity of consciousness and why it's been so difficult to study scientifically. Consciousness isn't a single phenomenon, but rather a collection of related processes, each with their own neural mechanisms and characteristics. Like a gentle symphony with multiple movements, consciousness unfolds through the coordinated activity of many different systems, each contributing their own voice to the overall experience of being aware. As we continue this exploration, we'll delve deeper into how these systems work together, what happens when they're disrupted, and what the latest scientific theories suggest about the nature of conscious experience. But for now, let yourself rest in this understanding that consciousness is both beautifully complex and elegantly simple, a natural process that emerges from the intricate dance of billions of neurons working together in your brain. The gentle mystery deepens as we explore one of the most remarkable aspects of consciousness, how it creates the seamless experience of perceiving a unified world. Right now, as you listen to these words, your brain is performing an extraordinary feat of integration that happens so smoothly, so effortlessly, that you're likely not even aware it's occurring. Consider this moment. Light is entering your eyes. Sound waves are reaching your ears. Perhaps you're feeling the texture of fabric against your skin, or sensing the temperature of the air around you. Each of these sensory experiences is being processed by different regions of your brain, yet you don't experience them as separate, disconnected events. Instead, they blend together into a single, unified experience of being present in this moment. This process is called binding, and it represents one of consciousness's most elegant achievements. Your visual system processes color in one area, motion in another, and shapes in yet another region. Your auditory system breaks down sounds into their component frequencies, rhythms, and spatial locations. Touch, smell, and taste all have their own specialized processing areas. Yet somehow, all of this disparate information comes together to create the rich, integrated experience of conscious awareness. Scientists have discovered that this binding process relies on precise timing mechanisms in the brain. Different sensory signals travel at different speeds and require different amounts of processing time. Light travels faster than sound, so visual information reaches your brain before auditory information from the same event. Yet you experience them as simultaneous because your brain has learned to compensate for these timing differences, creating what researchers call the temporal binding window. This temporal coordination happens through those neural oscillations we touched on earlier. When different brain regions synchronize their electrical activity, they create windows of opportunity for information to be integrated. It's like a symphony orchestra, where the conductor's baton helps different sections play in harmony. Except in your brain, this coordination emerges spontaneously through the natural dynamics of neural networks. The binding process extends beyond just sensory integration. Your brain also binds together information across time, creating the experience of continuity and narrative flow in your consciousness. Each moment of awareness doesn't exist in isolation, but is woven together with previous moments to create the sense of an ongoing, continuous experience. This temporal binding helps explain why consciousness feels like a flowing stream rather than a series of disconnected snapshots. Your brain is constantly integrating new information with recent memories, creating predictions about what might happen next, and updating your ongoing sense of self and situation. This process happens so smoothly that the boundaries between perception, memory, and anticipation blur together into the unified flow of conscious experience. But what exactly determines which information makes it into this unified, conscious experience? This brings us to one of the most fascinating aspects of consciousness research: the study of attention and its role in shaping awareness. Attention acts like a gentle spotlight, illuminating certain aspects of your experience while leaving others in relative darkness. But unlike a mechanical spotlight, attention is dynamic and intelligent, constantly shifting based on what your brain determines to be most relevant or important at any given moment. There are several different types of attention working together in your brain. Bottom-up attention is driven by the inherent properties of stimuli themselves. A sudden loud sound, a bright flash of light, or an unexpected movement will automatically capture your attention. This type of attention is fast, automatic, and serves an important evolutionary function by alerting you to potentially significant changes in your environment. Top-down attention, on the other hand, is under your voluntary control. When you decide to focus on these words, or when you choose to listen for a particular sound, you're engaging top-down attention. This type of attention is slower and more effortful, but it allows you to direct your consciousness toward your goals and intentions. These two types of attention work together in a delicate balance. Your brain is constantly monitoring your environment for unexpected changes, while also maintaining focus on your current priorities. When something important happens, bottom-up attention can override top-down attention, redirecting your awareness to the new stimulus. But most of the time, you maintain voluntary control over where you direct your conscious attention. Recent research has revealed that attention and consciousness, while closely related, are not the same thing. You can be conscious of things you're not attending to, and you can attend to things that don't reach full conscious awareness. This distinction has helped scientists understand that consciousness involves multiple processes working together, rather than being a single, unified phenomenon. This brings us to another crucial component of consciousness: working memory. Working memory is your brain's capacity to temporarily hold and manipulate information, creating a kind of mental workspace where conscious thoughts can unfold. Think of working memory as a gentle, ever-changing stage where the contents of consciousness play out. When you're having a conversation, working memory holds the words you just heard while you formulate your response. When you're solving a problem, it maintains the relevant information while you consider different solutions. When you're simply daydreaming, it provides the canvas on which your thoughts and images arise. Working memory has a limited capacity, typically able to hold only a few pieces of information at once. This limitation helps explain why consciousness feels focused rather than overwhelming. Despite the vast amount of information your brain processes every second, only a small subset makes it into the spotlight of conscious awareness at any given time. The contents of working memory are constantly changing, updated by new perceptions, memories, and thoughts. This dynamic updating process contributes to the flowing, ever-changing quality of consciousness. Each moment brings new information into the workspace, while previous contents fade or are actively suppressed to make room for what's currently relevant. Scientists have identified specific brain networks involved in working memory, including regions in the prefrontal cortex and parietal cortex. These areas show sustained activity when information is being held in conscious awareness, and their activity patterns reflect the specific contents of consciousness at any given moment. The relationship between working memory and consciousness helps explain why certain types of brain damage can profoundly affect conscious experience. When working memory systems are damaged, patients may retain basic perceptual abilities, but lose the capacity to maintain coherent, integrated conscious experiences. Their consciousness becomes fragmented, unable to bind together information across time and space in the normal way. This fragmentation can also occur in certain psychiatric conditions. In schizophrenia, for example, disruptions in working memory and attention can lead to disordered conscious experiences, where the normal integration of thoughts, perceptions, and memories breaks down. These conditions provide valuable insights into how consciousness depends on the coordinated activity of multiple brain systems. As we explore these mechanisms of consciousness, it's important to remember that we're describing the neural processes that seem to accompany conscious experience, not necessarily the consciousness itself. The relationship between brain activity and subjective experience remains one of the deepest mysteries in science. This mystery becomes even more apparent when we consider the role of prediction in consciousness. Your brain is not simply a passive receiver of sensory information. Instead, it's constantly generating predictions about what you're likely to experience next, and these predictions play a crucial role in shaping conscious awareness. Every moment, your brain is running sophisticated models of your environment and your body, using past experience to predict what sensory information should be arriving. When predictions match incoming sensory data, the brain can process information more efficiently. When predictions are violated, attention is drawn to the unexpected information, and conscious awareness is updated accordingly. This predictive processing happens at multiple levels simultaneously. Low-level predictions might involve expecting that the edges of objects will remain stable as you move your eyes. Higher-level predictions might involve expecting certain words to follow others in a sentence, or expecting familiar faces to appear in familiar places. The predictive nature of consciousness helps explain many perceptual phenomena. When you're reading, your brain predicts upcoming words based on context, allowing you to read fluently even when some letters are partially obscured. When you're listening to music, your brain generates expectations about rhythm and melody, creating the sense of musical tension and resolution that makes music emotionally engaging. Dreams provide a particularly fascinating window into the predictive nature of consciousness. During dream states, your brain continues to generate predictions and create conscious experiences, but without the usual sensory input to constrain and correct these predictions. The result is the surreal, often illogical quality of dream consciousness, where your brain's predictive models run free without external validation. The study of dreams has revealed important insights about consciousness more generally. During rapid eye movement sleep, the same posterior brain regions that support waking consciousness remain highly active, while frontal regions involved in logical thinking and reality testing become less active. This pattern helps explain why dreams feel real while you're experiencing them, even though they often contain impossible or bizarre elements. Dreams also demonstrate that consciousness can exist in the absence of external sensory input. The brain can generate rich, vivid, conscious experiences entirely from internal neural activity. This suggests that consciousness is fundamentally about the brain's capacity to create integrated, coherent models of experience, whether those models are constrained by sensory input or generated purely from internal processes. The relationship between consciousness and sleep reveals another important aspect of awareness: its dependence on the right level of neural activity. Consciousness requires what scientists call the Goldilocks zone of brain activity. Not too little and not too much, but just right. During deep sleep, overall brain activity decreases, and the coordinated patterns of neural oscillations that support consciousness are disrupted. Different brain regions become more isolated from each other, unable to share information effectively. The result is the absence of conscious experience, or at least the absence of experiences that can be remembered upon waking. Anesthesia provides another window into this relationship between brain activity and consciousness. Anesthetic drugs work by disrupting the neural communication patterns that support conscious awareness. Some anesthetics reduce overall brain activity, while others specifically target the coordination between different brain regions. In both cases, the result is the temporary elimination of conscious experience. The precise mechanisms by which anesthetics eliminate consciousness are still being studied, but research has revealed that consciousness depends not just on the level of brain activity, but on the patterns of connectivity between different brain regions. When these patterns are disrupted, even if individual brain regions remain active, consciousness fades away. This understanding has important implications for medical practice. Anesthesiologists can now use brain monitoring techniques to ensure that patients are truly unconscious during surgery, rather than simply paralyzed and unable to respond. These techniques measure the connectivity and integration of brain activity, providing more accurate assessments of conscious state than traditional methods. The study of consciousness during altered states has also revealed the flexibility and adaptability of conscious experience. Meditation, for example, can produce profound changes in the quality and content of consciousness. Long-term meditators show altered patterns of brain activity, with increased connectivity between regions involved in attention and self-awareness, and decreased activity in regions associated with mind-wandering and self-referential thinking. These changes suggest that consciousness is not fixed or static, but can be trained and modified through practice. Different meditative traditions produce different patterns of brain activity and different qualities of conscious experience, from the focused attention of concentration practices to the open awareness of mindfulness meditation. The plasticity of consciousness extends to other domains as well. People who lose one sense often develop enhanced abilities in their remaining senses, with corresponding changes in brain organization. The brain regions that would normally process the lost sensory information become recruited for processing other types of information, demonstrating the remarkable adaptability of conscious experience. This plasticity raises profound questions about the nature of consciousness and personal identity. If the patterns of brain activity that support consciousness can change so dramatically, what remains constant about the self? This question touches on one of the deepest philosophical issues in consciousness research: the relationship between consciousness and personal identity. Your sense of being a continuous self, persisting through time, despite constant changes in your thoughts, experiences, and even brain structure, is one of the most remarkable features of consciousness. This sense of self appears to emerge from the integration of multiple types of information: memories of your past, awareness of your present thoughts and sensations, and expectations about your future. The brain systems that support self-awareness are among the most recently evolved and most complex in the human brain. They include regions involved in autobiographical memory, emotional processing, and what scientists call theory of mind. The ability to understand that other people have thoughts and experiences different from your own. Damage to these systems can profoundly affect the sense of self. Some patients lose the ability to form new autobiographical memories, living in a perpetual present without the continuity that normally binds experience together. Others develop conditions where they feel detached from their own thoughts and experiences, as if observing themselves from the outside. These clinical cases provide valuable insights into how consciousness constructs the sense of self, but they also highlight the fragility and complexity of this construction. The self that feels so solid and permanent is actually a dynamic, ongoing process, constantly reconstructed from moment to moment by the integrative processes of consciousness. As we explore these deeper aspects of consciousness, we begin to appreciate not just its complexity, but also its profound mystery. Each discovery in neuroscience reveals new layers of intricacy, new questions to be explored. The more we learn about the brain mechanisms that support consciousness, the more remarkable the phenomenon becomes. The gentle unfolding of conscious experience, the seamless integration of multiple sensory streams, the construction of a coherent sense of self, the capacity for reflection and awareness of awareness itself, all of these emerge from the coordinated activity of billions of neurons, each following simple electrical and chemical rules. Yet somehow, from this vast network of simple interactions, emerges the rich subjective experience of being conscious, the feeling of what it's like to be you. This emergence represents one of the most profound mysteries in all of science. How does subjective experience arise from objective physical processes? How does the electrical activity of neurons become the felt experience of seeing red, hearing music, or feeling joy? These questions remain at the heart of consciousness research, and their answers, if they come, may transform our understanding of mind, brain, and reality itself. For now, we rest in this gentle mystery, appreciating both what science has revealed and what remains unknown. Consciousness continues to unfold within you, moment by moment, a natural process as fundamental as breathing, yet as mysterious as the deepest questions about the nature of existence itself. As we drift deeper into this gentle exploration, let's turn our attention to what happens when consciousness encounters the unexpected, when the smooth flow of awareness meets disruption or change. These moments, whether subtle or profound, offer some of the most revealing insights into how consciousness actually works. Consider what happens when you're reading a book and suddenly realize you've been looking at the words, but not processing their meaning. Your eyes were moving, the visual information was reaching your brain, but conscious comprehension had temporarily stepped away. This common experience reveals something fundamental about consciousness. It's not simply about receiving information, but about actively engaging with that information in a meaningful way. This phenomenon, sometimes called mindless reading or zoning out, demonstrates that consciousness involves multiple layers of processing. The basic visual recognition systems continue to function, allowing you to track words and turn pages, but the higher order integration that creates meaningful understanding has temporarily disengaged. It's as if the spotlight of consciousness has dimmed without completely going out. Scientists have studied this state using brain imaging techniques, and they've discovered that during these moments of reduced awareness, activity decreases in regions associated with focused attention and working memory, while increasing in what's called the default mode network. This network, which includes areas like the medial prefrontal cortex and posterior cingulate cortex, becomes active when we're not focused on specific tasks, but instead engaged in internal mental processes like daydreaming or self-referential thinking. The default mode network represents one of neuroscience's most fascinating discoveries about consciousness. When you're not actively engaged in a particular task, your brain doesn't simply idle like a car engine at rest. Instead, it shifts into this alternative mode of operation where different patterns of connectivity emerge and consciousness takes on a different quality. During default mode activity, your mind might wander to future plans, revisit past memories, or engage in what researchers call autobiographical planning. This isn't random neural noise, but rather a sophisticated form of mental activity that serves important functions for consciousness and self-awareness. It's during these moments that your brain consolidates memories, makes connections between different experiences, and maintains the ongoing narrative of your personal identity. The interplay between focused consciousness and default mode processing reveals something beautiful about how awareness operates. Consciousness isn't a single, monolithic state, but rather a dynamic system that can shift between different modes of operation depending on the demands of the moment and the needs of the organism. This flexibility becomes even more apparent when we examine how consciousness adapts to different types of challenges or disruptions. Take, for example, what happens when someone experiences a stroke or other form of brain injury that affects conscious experience. The brain's response to such challenges reveals both its remarkable plasticity and the distributed nature of consciousness. When specific brain regions are damaged, consciousness doesn't simply disappear entirely. Instead, it often reorganizes itself, finding new pathways and alternative strategies to maintain awareness. Patients who lose vision due to damage in visual processing areas sometimes develop enhanced abilities in their remaining senses. Their consciousness adapts, creating new patterns of integration that compensate for the lost function. This neuroplasticity extends throughout life, not just in response to injury, but as a natural consequence of learning and experience. Every new skill you acquire, every memory you form, every habit you develop, subtly changes the patterns of connectivity in your brain and consequently the quality of your conscious experience. The malleability of consciousness becomes particularly evident when we examine how different cultural practices and life experiences shape awareness. People who grow up speaking tonal languages, where pitch changes alter word meaning, develop different patterns of auditory processing than those who speak non-tonal languages. Musicians show enhanced connectivity between brain regions involved in auditory and motor processing. Mathematicians develop specialized patterns of activation in areas involved in spatial and numerical reasoning. These differences aren't just academic curiosities. They represent fundamental variations in how consciousness organizes itself based on experience and practice. The same basic neural architecture gives rise to remarkably different patterns of awareness, depending on how that architecture is shaped by learning and development. This brings us to one of the most intriguing questions in consciousness research. How much of conscious experience is universal versus how much varies between individuals and cultures? While the basic mechanisms of consciousness appear to be shared across all humans, the specific content and quality of conscious experience can vary dramatically. Consider how different people experience pain. While the basic neural pathways involved in pain processing are similar across individuals, the subjective experience of pain can vary enormously. Some people are more sensitive to certain types of pain than others. Cultural background influences how pain is interpreted and expressed. Previous experiences with pain shape expectations and responses. Even something as seemingly basic as physical discomfort turns out to be deeply influenced by the unique history and context of each individual consciousness. This individual variation extends to every aspect of conscious experience. The way you see colors, process emotions, form memories, and construct your sense of self all reflect the unique pattern of connections that has developed in your particular brain over the course of your life. While we share the same basic architecture for consciousness, each person's awareness has its own distinctive signature. Yet despite this individual variation, there are certain features of consciousness that appear to be universal. The integration of sensory information into unified perceptions, the binding of experiences across time to create continuity, the capacity for self-reflection and awareness of awareness itself. These fundamental aspects of consciousness seem to emerge reliably from the human brain, regardless of cultural or individual differences. This universality suggests that consciousness, while flexible and adaptable, follows certain organizing principles that are deeply embedded in the structure and function of the nervous system. These principles have been shaped by millions of years of evolution, refined through countless generations to create the remarkable phenomenon of awareness that you're experiencing right now. Understanding these evolutionary origins helps us appreciate consciousness, not as a mysterious exception to natural processes, but as a natural consequence of how complex nervous systems develop and organize themselves. Consciousness didn't appear suddenly or inexplicably. It evolved gradually, building on simpler forms of information processing and integration that we can observe in other species. Even single-celled organisms display rudimentary forms of awareness, responding to their environment in ways that suggest basic information processing capabilities. As nervous systems became more complex through evolution, these simple response mechanisms evolved into increasingly sophisticated forms of awareness, and eventually into the rich reflective consciousness that characterizes human experience. This evolutionary perspective helps us understand why consciousness has the particular features it does. The integration of sensory information serves the crucial function of creating coherent representations of the environment that can guide behavior. The binding of experiences across time allows organisms to learn from the past and plan for the future. Self-awareness enables social cooperation and the transmission of knowledge across generations. Each feature of consciousness that we've explored serves important functions for survival and reproduction, which explains why these capacities have been preserved and refined through evolution. Consciousness isn't just a beautiful phenomenon to contemplate. It's a sophisticated biological tool that has enabled our species to thrive in complex environments. This functional perspective also helps explain some of the limitations and quirks of consciousness that we've discussed. The limited capacity of working memory, for example, makes sense when we consider that consciousness evolved to handle the most relevant information in any given moment, rather than to process unlimited amounts of data. The tendency for attention to be captured by sudden changes reflects the importance of detecting potential threats or opportunities in the environment. Even the gaps and discontinuities in consciousness that we explored earlier serve important functions. The periods of reduced awareness during routine activities allow the brain to conserve energy and resources for more demanding situations. The shifts between focused attention and default mode processing enable both immediate responsiveness and long-term planning and reflection. As we consider these evolutionary origins, it's worth pausing to appreciate the remarkable journey that consciousness represents. From the simplest forms of cellular responsiveness to the complex, self-aware experience you're having right now, consciousness embodies billions of years of evolutionary refinement and optimization. Yet this evolutionary perspective also raises profound questions about the nature of conscious experience. If consciousness is simply the result of evolutionary processes operating on neural tissue, why does it have the particular subjective quality that it does? Why do we experience anything at all, rather than simply processing information without awareness? This brings us back to what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. We can explain the functions that consciousness serves, map the neural processes that accompany it, and understand how it evolved and develops. But the fundamental question of why there is subjective experience at all, why there is something it is like to be conscious, remains mysteriously unanswered. Some scientists and philosophers argue that this subjective quality is simply an emergent property of complex information processing, no more mysterious than how wetness emerges from the interaction of water molecules. Others suggest that consciousness involves fundamental aspects of reality that we don't yet understand, perhaps related to the basic structure of space, time, or information itself. These different perspectives reflect the current state of consciousness research, where remarkable progress in understanding the mechanisms of awareness coexists with deep uncertainty about the fundamental nature of conscious experience. It's a field where rigorous scientific investigation meets profound philosophical mystery, where each answer seems to reveal new questions. One of the most intriguing recent developments in consciousness research involves the study of how consciousness can be altered in controlled ways. Researchers have begun using techniques like transcranial magnetic stimulation, where magnetic fields are applied to specific brain regions, to temporarily modify conscious experience in healthy volunteers. These studies have revealed that consciousness is far more malleable than we might expect. Brief magnetic stimulation over visual processing areas can cause temporary visual hallucinations. Stimulation over regions involved in self-awareness can create out-of-body experiences. Targeting areas involved in temporal processing can alter the perceived flow of time. Such experiments demonstrate that the seemingly stable and unified nature of consciousness is actually the result of dynamic processes that can be modified in real time. They also provide valuable insights into how different brain regions contribute to different aspects of conscious experience, helping to map the neural architecture of awareness with increasing precision. Similar insights have come from studies of psychedelic substances, which can profoundly alter consciousness in ways that are both fascinating and scientifically informative. Under controlled laboratory conditions, researchers have found that substances like psilocybin and LSD reduce activity in the default mode network, while increasing connectivity between brain regions that don't normally communicate extensively. The result is a form of consciousness characterized by reduced self-awareness, altered perception of time and space, and novel patterns of thought and emotion. Participants often report feelings of unity, transcendence, and profound insight, experiences that can have lasting positive effects on mood and well-being. These studies reveal that consciousness, rather than being fixed or rigid, is actually a dynamic process that can take on radically different forms while still maintaining its basic integrative function. They suggest that the ordinary waking consciousness we're familiar with is just one possible configuration of awareness, one particular way that the brain can organize and integrate information. This flexibility of consciousness has important implications for understanding and treating various mental health conditions. Depression, anxiety, and other psychiatric disorders often involve characteristic patterns of conscious experience, with attention biased toward negative information, memory focused on past failures, and self-awareness dominated by critical self-evaluation. Understanding consciousness as a dynamic, modifiable process opens up new possibilities for therapeutic intervention. Rather than simply treating symptoms with medication, clinicians can potentially help patients develop new patterns of conscious experience through techniques like meditation, cognitive therapy, and other approaches that directly target the mechanisms of awareness. The study of meditation has been particularly revealing in this regard. Long-term meditation practice can produce profound and lasting changes in consciousness, with meditators reporting increased present moment awareness, reduced mind wandering, and greater emotional equanimity. Brain imaging studies confirm that these subjective changes correspond to measurable alterations in neural structure and function. Advanced practitioners can achieve states of consciousness that seem to transcend the ordinary boundaries of self and world, experiencing what they describe as pure awareness without content, consciousness without an object. While such states might sound mystical, they can be studied scientifically and appear to involve specific, measurable changes in brain activity. During these deep meditative states, activity often decreases in regions associated with self-referential processing and the sense of being a separate self, while maintaining high levels of awareness and alertness. It's as if consciousness becomes simplified, stripped down to its essential features, without the usual overlay of thoughts, emotions, and self-concepts. These findings suggest that consciousness is not only flexible in its content, but also in its fundamental structure. The sense of being a separate self observing the world, which feels so fundamental to ordinary experience, appears to be a construction that can be temporarily suspended, while awareness itself remains intact. Such insights challenge our ordinary assumptions about consciousness and suggest that our usual way of experiencing awareness may represent just one possible mode of conscious organization. Like learning to see optical illusions or developing new perceptual skills, we may be capable of experiencing consciousness in ways that are quite different from our everyday state. This brings us to consider the relationship between consciousness and what we call reality. Our conscious experience feels immediate and direct, as if we're perceiving the world as it actually is. But neuroscience reveals that consciousness is actually a sophisticated construction, a virtual reality created by the brain based on sensory input, memory, and predictive processing. The colors you see don't exist in the external world, they're creations of your visual system. The sounds you hear are constructed from pressure waves in the air. Even your sense of your own body is a neural construction, built from multiple sensory inputs and constantly updated predictions. What we experience as reality is actually a kind of controlled hallucination, a model of the world created by consciousness rather than a direct perception of external truth. This constructive nature of consciousness becomes evident in various perceptual illusions and unusual experiences. When you see a magic trick, your conscious experience of what's happening doesn't match the physical reality of the situation. When you dream, your brain creates vivid, convincing experiences without any external sensory input. When you remember past events, you're not accessing perfect recordings, but rather reconstructing experiences from fragmentary neural traces. Understanding consciousness as a constructive process rather than a passive recording device helps explain many of its features and limitations. The brain evolved not to create perfect representations of reality, but to generate useful models that guide behavior and support survival. These models are generally accurate enough for practical purposes, but they're also shaped by the particular needs and limitations of the organism that creates them. This perspective suggests that consciousness, rather than revealing absolute truth about reality, provides us with a particular kind of interface with the world, one that's been optimized by evolution for the needs of beings like ourselves. Other species, with different sensory capabilities and environmental challenges, likely experience forms of consciousness quite different from our own. The recognition that consciousness is constructed rather than given raises fascinating questions about the possibility of alternative forms of awareness. If consciousness is a process that can be modified, enhanced, or radically altered, what other modes of conscious experience might be possible? Could future technologies allow us to experience forms of consciousness beyond what natural evolution has provided? Some researchers are already exploring these possibilities through brain-computer interfaces that can detect and decode neural signals associated with conscious experience. While current technology is still primitive, it's not hard to imagine future systems that could enhance memory, accelerate learning, or even allow direct sharing of conscious experiences between individuals. Such possibilities might sound like science fiction, but they're based on solid understanding of how consciousness works at the neural level. If consciousness is indeed a process of information integration and construction, then it should be possible, in principle, to modify or enhance that process through technological intervention. Of course, such developments would raise profound ethical questions about the nature of personal identity, the authenticity of experience, and the potential risks of modifying consciousness. But they also represent the logical extension of what we're learning about the malleable, constructive nature of conscious awareness. For now, these remain largely theoretical possibilities, but they highlight the remarkable fact that consciousness, this phenomenon that feels so intimate and unchangeable, is actually a dynamic process that we're only beginning to understand. Each discovery in neuroscience reveals new aspects of how consciousness works, and new possibilities for how it might be modified or enhanced. As we continue this gentle exploration, let's turn our attention to what happens to consciousness during the transitions between different states of awareness. These liminal moments, when consciousness shifts from one mode to another, offer unique insights into the dynamic nature of awareness itself. Consider the transition from waking consciousness to sleep, a journey you make every night yet rarely observe carefully. As you settle into bed and begin to relax, Consciousness doesn't simply switch off like a light. Instead, it gradually transforms, passing through several distinct stages each with its own characteristic features. In the early stages of sleep onset, called hypnagogia, consciousness enters a twilight state where the boundaries between waking and sleeping awareness become fluid. You might experience vivid imagery, hear voices or sounds that aren't there, or have brief, dreamlike thoughts that seem to arise spontaneously. This state demonstrates that consciousness exists on a continuum, rather than in discrete categories of awake or asleep. During hypnagogia, the brain shows a mixed pattern of activity, with some regions beginning to show sleep-like patterns, while others maintain waking-like activity. It's as if different aspects of consciousness are falling asleep at different rates, creating a complex layered state of awareness that's neither fully awake nor fully asleep. Similar transitional states occur throughout the night as consciousness cycles between different stages of sleep. During light sleep, some awareness of the external environment persists, which is why you can be awakened by important sounds like your name being called or a baby crying, while ignoring less relevant noises. During deep sleep, consciousness becomes more thoroughly withdrawn from external stimuli, though it doesn't disappear entirely. The most fascinating transition occurs during the onset of REM sleep, when the brain becomes highly active, but consciousness takes on the distinctive quality of dreaming. This transition reveals something remarkable about the flexibility of conscious experience. Using essentially the same neural architecture that supports waking awareness, the brain creates an entirely different form of consciousness, one characterized by vivid imagery, emotional intensity, and altered logic. Dreams demonstrate that consciousness can exist independently of sensory input, creating rich, detailed experiences entirely from internal neural activity. The visual imagery in dreams can be as vivid as waking perception, the emotions as intense as those experienced during waking life. Yet all of this occurs while the brain is essentially isolated from external sensory information. This capacity for internally generated conscious experience reveals something fundamental about the nature of awareness itself. Consciousness isn't simply a passive reflection of external reality, but an active construction that can operate independently of sensory input. The same integrative processes that bind together sensory information during waking consciousness can operate on internally generated signals to create the rich, complex experiences of dream awareness. The transition back to waking consciousness involves yet another remarkable transformation. As you emerge from sleep, consciousness doesn't simply resume where it left off. Instead, there's a complex process of reconstruction as the brain re-establishes its model of self and world, reactivates working memory systems, and reconnects with sensory input from the environment. Sometimes this reconstruction process is imperfect, leading to the disorientation and confusion that can occur upon awakening from deep sleep. You might temporarily forget where you are, what day it is, or even who you are. These moments of confusion reveal how much work consciousness normally does to maintain coherent models of self and situation, work that becomes visible only when the process is disrupted. The study of these transitional states has provided valuable insights into the mechanisms underlying consciousness. They reveal that awareness is not a single, unified phenomenon, but rather a collection of processes that can be dissociated from each other under certain conditions. Different aspects of consciousness, such as self-awareness, sensory processing, memory, and attention, can operate independently or in various combinations, creating the rich variety of conscious states that we experience. This modular view of consciousness helps explain not only normal variations in awareness, but also the effects of various neurological and psychiatric conditions. When specific brain systems are affected by injury or disease, particular aspects of consciousness may be impaired while others remain intact, creating the complex patterns of symptoms that characterize different disorders of consciousness. Understanding consciousness as a collection of interacting processes rather than a single phenomenon also helps us appreciate the remarkable achievement that normal, integrated consciousness represents. The seamless, unified awareness that characterizes ordinary waking consciousness emerges from the coordinated activity of multiple brain systems, each contributing its own specialized function to the overall experience. This coordination happens automatically and effortlessly under normal conditions, but it requires precise timing and extensive communication between different brain regions. When this coordination is disrupted, whether by sleep, anesthesia, brain injury, or other factors, consciousness fragments or disappears, revealing how dependent our normal unified awareness is on the underlying neural processes that support it. As we appreciate this remarkable complexity, we also begin to understand why consciousness has been such a challenging phenomenon for science to study. Unlike other biological processes that can be understood by breaking them down into simpler components, consciousness seems to emerge from the interactions between multiple systems rather than residing in any particular part of the brain. This emergent quality makes consciousness both fascinating and mysterious. Just as the wetness of water emerges from the interactions between water molecules, but cannot be found in any individual molecule, consciousness emerges from the interactions between neurons, but cannot be localized to any specific brain region or process. The emergent nature of consciousness also means that studying it requires approaches that can capture these complex interactions, rather than simply examining individual components in isolation. This has led to the development of new research methods that can measure and analyze the patterns of connectivity and coordination that seem to underlie conscious experience. These approaches have revealed that consciousness involves what scientists call criticality, a state where the brain operates at the edge between order and chaos, maintaining just enough stability to preserve coherent patterns while remaining flexible enough to adapt to changing circumstances. This critical state allows for the optimal integration of information that appears to be necessary for conscious awareness. When the brain operates too far toward order, it becomes rigid and unable to process new information effectively. When it operates too far toward chaos, it loses the coherent patterns necessary for integrated experience. Consciousness emerges in the narrow range between these extremes, where the brain can maintain both stability and flexibility simultaneously. This understanding helps explain why consciousness is so sensitive to various disruptions. Anesthetics, sleep, and brain injuries can all shift the brain away from this critical state, causing consciousness to fade or disappear. Conversely, techniques that help maintain optimal brain states, such as certain forms of meditation or cognitive training, may enhance the quality and stability of conscious experience. The discovery of criticality in consciousness also connects our understanding of awareness to broader principles that operate throughout nature. Critical states occur in many complex systems, from weather patterns to ecosystem dynamics, suggesting that consciousness may represent a particular instance of more general principles of organization and emergence. This connection to broader natural phenomena helps situate consciousness within the larger context of scientific understanding, rather than treating it as a completely unique or mysterious exception to natural laws. While consciousness remains remarkable and in many ways mysterious, it appears to follow principles that we can study and understand using the same scientific methods that have been successful in other domains. As we continue this exploration, we're beginning to see consciousness not as an isolated phenomenon, but as part of the broader tapestry of natural processes. It emerges from the same physical laws that govern all matter and energy, yet it gives rise to the rich, subjective experience that makes existence meaningful and beautiful. This perspective invites us to appreciate consciousness both as a scientific phenomenon worthy of careful study and as the intimate, personal experience through which we encounter the world. These two perspectives, the objective and the subjective, don't conflict with each other. but rather offer complementary ways of understanding the remarkable phenomenon of awareness. The gentle mystery of consciousness continues to unfold, revealing new layers of complexity and beauty with each discovery. As we rest in this understanding, we can appreciate both the progress that science has made and the profound questions that remain. Consciousness remains one of the most fascinating frontiers in human knowledge, a phenomenon that bridges the gap between the physical and the experiential, between the objective world of science and the subjective world of personal experience. In this bridging, consciousness reveals itself to be perhaps the most fundamental aspect of existence, the very ground from which all knowledge and experience arise. It is both the subject that knows and the means by which knowing occurs, both the observer and the very capacity for observation itself. This dual nature makes consciousness both intimately familiar and ultimately mysterious, a phenomenon we know more directly than anything else, yet understand less completely than we might wish. As we drift deeper into this gentle exploration, let's turn our attention to one of the most intriguing aspects of consciousness research: the question of what happens when awareness encounters its own limits. These boundaries of consciousness, these edges where our normal experience begins to fade or transform, offer some of the most revealing insights into the nature of awareness itself. Consider what happens during those quiet moments, just before you fall asleep, when consciousness begins its nightly journey toward rest. As your body settles and your mind grows quiet, you might notice subtle changes in the quality of your awareness. Thoughts become less linear, more dreamlike. Images might appear spontaneously behind your closed eyelids. The boundaries between imagination and perception start to blur in gentle, almost imperceptible ways. This twilight state, which scientists call the hypnagogic transition, reveals something beautiful about the fluid nature of consciousness. Rather than switching abruptly from awake to asleep, awareness moves through a gradual spectrum of states, each with its own unique characteristics and neural signatures. During this transition, brain imaging studies show fascinating patterns of activity. Some regions begin to show the slower wave patterns associated with sleep, while others maintain the faster rhythms of waking consciousness. Different networks in your brain are essentially transitioning at different rates, creating a complex mosaic of neural activity that corresponds to the mixed, dreamlike quality of hypnagogic experience. The visual cortex might generate spontaneous imagery, creating the fleeting pictures you sometimes see with your eyes closed. The auditory system might produce phantom sounds or voices. Areas involved in logical thinking become less active, while regions associated with memory and emotion remain engaged, allowing fragments of experiences and feelings to drift through awareness, like clouds, across an evening sky. This natural experiment that occurs every night demonstrates something profound about consciousness. It shows us that awareness is not a single, monolithic phenomenon, but rather a collection of processes that can operate somewhat independently. Different aspects of consciousness can be present or absent in various combinations, creating the rich variety of states we experience throughout our daily cycle of sleeping and waking. The study of these transitional states has led scientists to develop what they call the multidimensional view of consciousness. Rather than thinking of awareness as simply on or off, awake or asleep, researchers now understand consciousness as involving multiple dimensions that can vary independently. There's the dimension of arousal or alertness, the dimension of awareness or responsiveness to the environment, and the dimension of self-awareness or reflective consciousness. Each of these dimensions can be present to different degrees, creating a vast space of possible conscious states. During normal waking consciousness, all three dimensions are highly active. During dreaming sleep, awareness and self-awareness may be present, while environmental responsiveness is reduced. During deep sleep, all three dimensions become minimally active, though they don't disappear entirely. This multidimensional understanding helps explain the complexity and variability of conscious experience, not just during sleep transitions, but throughout our daily lives. The quality of your awareness changes subtly, but continuously throughout the day, influenced by factors like fatigue, attention, emotion, and the specific demands of whatever you're doing at any given moment. Consider how your consciousness feels different when you're deeply absorbed in reading a compelling book, versus when you're having a casual conversation, versus when you're engaged in physical exercise. Each of these activities engages different neural networks and creates different patterns of awareness, yet all are forms of normal waking consciousness. The recognition of this variability has important implications for how we understand and measure consciousness, particularly in clinical settings. Traditional methods of assessing consciousness in medical patients often rely on simple behavioral responses, essentially asking whether someone is awake and responsive. But this approach misses the subtle gradations and different dimensions of awareness that we now know exist. Modern neuroscience has developed more sophisticated approaches to measuring consciousness, techniques that can detect awareness even when behavioral responses are absent or impaired. These methods often involve measuring the complexity and integration of brain activity rather than simply looking at overall levels of neural firing. One particularly elegant approach involves using brief magnetic pulses to stimulate the brain while simultaneously recording the resulting electrical activity. In a conscious brain, this stimulation triggers a complex cascade of neural responses that spreads across multiple brain regions in organized patterns. In an unconscious brain, the response is much simpler and more localized, suggesting that consciousness depends on the brain's capacity for complex, integrated responses to stimulation. This technique, called Perturbational Complexity Index, or PCI, has proven remarkably accurate at distinguishing conscious from unconscious states across a wide variety of conditions, from normal sleep to anesthesia to various disorders of consciousness. It provides an objective measure that corresponds closely to subjective reports of awareness when those are available. The development of such objective measures represents a significant advance in consciousness research, allowing scientists to study awareness in situations where subjective reports are not possible. This has opened up new avenues for understanding consciousness in patients with brain injuries, in infants and young children, and potentially even in other species. These advances have also revealed surprising discoveries about consciousness in seemingly unconscious patients. Some individuals who appear to be in vegetative states, showing no behavioral signs of awareness, actually show complex patterns of brain activity that suggest the presence of conscious experience. These patients, who are said to have covert consciousness, challenge our understanding of what it means to be conscious and raise important ethical questions about care and treatment. The existence of covert consciousness demonstrates once again how much we still have to learn about the nature of awareness. It reminds us that consciousness is not always visible from the outside, that the rich, subjective experience of being aware can persist even when the usual pathways for expressing that awareness are damaged or disrupted. This hidden nature of consciousness extends beyond clinical cases to our everyday experience as well. Much of what goes on in your conscious mind remains private and internal, accessible only to you. Even when you try to describe your experiences to others, something essential about the subjective quality of those experiences seems to resist communication. This privacy of consciousness has puzzled philosophers and scientists for centuries. How can we ever really know what it's like to be someone else? How can we be sure that your experience of the color blue is the same as mine? These questions touch on fundamental issues about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to the physical world. The privacy problem, as it's sometimes called, highlights one of the most challenging aspects of consciousness research. Unlike other scientific phenomena, consciousness has an inherently subjective dimension that seems to resist objective study. We can measure brain activity, observe behavior, and develop theories about how consciousness works. But the actual experience of being conscious remains accessible only from the first-person perspective. Yet this limitation hasn't prevented remarkable progress in understanding consciousness. By carefully correlating subjective reports with objective measurements, by studying how consciousness changes under different conditions, and by examining what happens when consciousness is disrupted, scientists have developed increasingly sophisticated theories about how awareness arises from brain activity. One of the most influential of these theories is called Integrated Information Theory, or IIT. This theory proposes that consciousness corresponds to integrated information, the degree to which a system can generate information that is both differentiated and unified. According to IIT, any system that integrates information will have some degree of consciousness, with the amount of consciousness proportional to the quantity of integrated information the system can generate. This theory makes several surprising predictions. It suggests that consciousness is not limited to biological brains, but could arise in any sufficiently complex system that integrates information. It also predicts that some brain states we might consider unconscious could actually involve more consciousness than normal waking states, while some states we consider conscious might involve relatively little integrated information. IIT has been tested using various experimental approaches, and some of its predictions have been confirmed. For example, the theory correctly predicts that consciousness decreases during deep sleep and anesthesia, states where information integration in the brain becomes fragmented. It also predicts patterns of consciousness during different types of brain stimulation that match experimental observations. However, like all theories of consciousness, IIT remains controversial and incomplete. Some critics argue that it leads to counterintuitive conclusions, such as the idea that simple systems like photodiodes could be conscious. Others question whether integrated information really captures what we mean by consciousness, or whether it simply measures one aspect of complex information processing. Another influential theory is called global workspace theory, which proposes that consciousness arises when information becomes globally available across the brain. According to this theory, most mental processing occurs unconsciously in specialized modules, but consciousness emerges when information from these modules is broadcast to a global workspace where it becomes accessible to many different brain systems simultaneously. This broadcasting process is thought to occur through synchronized neural oscillations that allow different brain regions to communicate effectively. When information reaches the global workspace, it becomes conscious and can influence a wide range of cognitive processes, from attention and memory to decision-making and action planning. Global workspace theory has generated substantial experimental support. Brain imaging studies have identified networks of brain regions that become active when information becomes conscious, and these networks correspond closely to what the theory predicts. The theory also explains many features of consciousness, such as its limited capacity and its role in flexible adaptive behavior. Yet like IIT, global workspace theory faces challenges and limitations. Critics argue that it explains the functions of consciousness, but doesn't address why there should be subjective experience at all. The theory describes how information becomes globally available in the brain, but it doesn't explain why this should feel like anything from the inside. This limitation points to what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. Even if we can explain all the functions that consciousness serves, all the information processing that accompanies it, and all the neural mechanisms that support it, we still face the puzzle of why there is subjective experience at all. Why does it feel like something to be conscious, rather than simply having unconscious information processing that achieves the same behavioral outcomes? The hard problem remains one of the most challenging issues in consciousness research. Some scientists argue that it's not really a scientific problem at all, that once we fully understand the mechanisms of consciousness, the subjective aspect will be explained as well. Others maintain that subjective experience represents a fundamental aspect of reality that cannot be reduced to physical processes alone. This debate touches on deep philosophical questions about the nature of mind and reality. Are mental phenomena ultimately reducible to physical processes, or do they represent a distinct level of reality? Is consciousness an emergent property of complex information processing, or does it reflect something more fundamental about the structure of the universe? These questions may seem abstract, but they have practical implications for how we understand ourselves and our place in the world. They influence how we think about artificial intelligence and whether machines could ever be truly conscious. They affect how we consider the moral status of different beings and what obligations we might have towards systems that could be conscious. The uncertainty surrounding these fundamental questions might seem unsettling, but there's something beautifully humbling about acknowledging the limits of our current understanding. Consciousness remains one of the great mysteries of existence, a phenomenon that we experience intimately, yet understand incompletely. This mystery doesn't diminish the value of scientific research into consciousness. Each discovery adds to our understanding. Each theory provides new insights, and each experimental finding brings us closer to a complete picture of how awareness arises from the activity of the brain. The mystery simply reminds us that consciousness touches on some of the deepest questions about the nature of existence itself. As we rest in this gentle uncertainty, we can appreciate consciousness as both a scientific phenomenon worthy of careful study and a personal experience that remains wonderfully mysterious. The fact that you are aware right now that there is something it's like to be you represents one of the most remarkable facts about the universe we inhabit. This awareness that you're experiencing doesn't exist in isolation. It's connected to the awareness experienced by every other conscious being, part of what might be thought of as the universe's capacity for self-awareness. Through consciousness, the cosmos has developed the ability to know itself, to reflect on its own existence, and to wonder about its own nature. In quiet moments like this, when we turn our attention to consciousness itself, we participate in this cosmic self-reflection. We become the universe examining its own capacity for awareness, matter contemplating its own ability to experience and understand. There's something profoundly beautiful about this recursive quality of consciousness, this ability of awareness to become aware of itself. The scientific study of consciousness continues to advance, bringing new discoveries and insights each year. New technologies allow us to measure brain activity with increasing precision. New theories provide fresh perspectives on how consciousness might arise from neural processes. New experiments test specific predictions about the mechanisms of awareness. Yet with each advance, the mystery of consciousness seems to deepen rather than diminish. Each answer reveals new questions. Each insight opens up new puzzles to explore. This is not a limitation of scientific progress, but rather a testament to the profound complexity and richness of conscious experience. As we've seen throughout this exploration, consciousness involves multiple levels of organization, from the electrical activity of individual neurons to the large-scale networks that span the entire brain. It emerges from the precise timing of neural signals, the integration of information across different brain regions, and the dynamic patterns of connectivity that change from moment to moment. Consciousness depends on the brain's capacity to create unified experiences from disparate sources of information, to bind together sensory inputs across different modalities, and to maintain coherent representations that persist across time. It involves the interplay between attention and awareness, between focused processing and global integration, between bottom-up sensory signals and top-down predictions and expectations. The study of consciousness has revealed that awareness is not a passive recording of external reality, but an active construction, a sophisticated virtual reality created by the brain based on sensory input, prior experience, and ongoing predictions about what's likely to happen next. This constructive process operates continuously, updating your model of yourself and the world with each passing moment. Understanding consciousness as a constructive process helps explain many of its features and limitations. It explains why perception can be influenced by expectations, why memory is reconstructive rather than reproductive, and why consciousness can create vivid experiences even in the absence of sensory input, as happens during dreams. This constructive view also highlights the remarkable achievement that normal, integrated consciousness represents. The seamless, unified experience of being aware emerges from the coordinated activity of billions of neurons, each following simple electrical and chemical rules. Yet from this vast network of simple interactions emerges the rich, complex phenomenon of conscious awareness. The emergence of consciousness from neural activity represents one of the most profound examples of emergence in the natural world. Just as the properties of water emerge from the interactions of hydrogen and oxygen atoms, and just as the behavior of ant colonies emerges from the interactions of individual ants, consciousness emerges from the interactions of neurons in the brain. But consciousness may represent a particularly special kind of emergence, one that creates not just new properties, but an entirely new level of reality, the level of subjective experience. Through consciousness, the objective world of matter and energy gives rise to the subjective world of thoughts, feelings, and experiences. This emergence of subjectivity from objectivity, of mind from matter, remains one of the most fascinating puzzles in all of science. It connects neuroscience to philosophy, biology to physics, and scientific investigation to personal experience in ways that continue to challenge and inspire researchers across many different fields. The interdisciplinary nature of consciousness research reflects the complexity of the phenomenon itself. Understanding consciousness requires insights from neuroscience and psychology, from computer science and philosophy, from physics and biology. No single discipline has all the answers, but each contributes essential pieces to the larger puzzle. This collaborative approach has led to remarkable advances in recent years. The development of sophisticated brain imaging techniques has allowed researchers to observe consciousness in action, tracking the neural processes that accompany different states of awareness. The creation of detailed computational models has helped test theories about how consciousness might arise from information processing. The careful study of patients with brain injuries has revealed how different aspects of consciousness can be selectively impaired or preserved. Yet for all this progress, fundamental questions remain. We still don't fully understand how subjective experience arises from objective neural processes. We still can't definitively determine whether other beings or systems are conscious. We still don't know whether consciousness is unique to biological brains or could arise in artificial systems as well. These uncertainties don't represent failures of scientific investigation, but rather reflect the profound depth of the phenomenon we're trying to understand. Consciousness may be the most complex phenomenon in the known universe, emerging from the intricate interactions of the most complex object we know of, the human brain. The brain itself contains roughly 86 billion neurons, each connected to thousands of others through synapses, creating a network of extraordinary complexity. The number of possible patterns of connection in the brain exceeds the number of atoms in the observable universe. From this vast network of possibilities, consciousness emerges as a particular pattern of activity, a specific way of organizing and integrating information that gives rise to the unified experience of being aware. Understanding how this emergence occurs, how consciousness arises from the dance of electrical and chemical signals in the brain, remains one of the greatest challenges in science. It's a challenge that requires not just new experimental techniques and theoretical frameworks, but also new ways of thinking about the relationship between objective and subjective reality. As research continues, new discoveries emerge regularly, each adding another piece to the puzzle of consciousness. Recent studies have identified specific brain networks involved in different aspects of awareness. New theories have proposed novel mechanisms for how consciousness might arise from neural activity. Advanced technologies have enabled increasingly precise measurements of brain activity during conscious and unconscious states. Each of these advances brings us closer to understanding the mechanisms of consciousness, even as they reveal new layers of complexity and new questions to explore. The field of consciousness research is vibrant and rapidly evolving, with new insights emerging from laboratories around the world. Yet perhaps the most important insight that has emerged from decades of consciousness research is a deeper appreciation for the phenomenon itself. The more we learn about consciousness, the more remarkable it becomes. The fact that matter can organize itself in such a way as to become aware, that the universe can develop the capacity to experience and understand itself, represents one of the most extraordinary developments in the history of the cosmos. This appreciation extends to your own consciousness, the awareness you're experiencing right now as you listen to these words. Your consciousness is not separate from the universe, but is the universe becoming aware of itself through the particular pattern of matter and energy that constitutes your brain and body. In quiet moments of reflection like this, we can appreciate consciousness both as a scientific phenomenon worthy of careful study and as the most intimate aspect of our existence. It's the foundation of everything we know and experience, the ground from which all knowledge and understanding arise. The mystery of consciousness invites us to approach it with both scientific rigor and personal wonder, with both objective investigation and subjective appreciation. It reminds us that we are part of something larger than ourselves, participants in the universe's ongoing project of self-understanding. As we continue to explore consciousness through scientific research, we also continue to experience it directly through our daily lives. Each moment of awareness, each experience of being conscious, adds to the universe's total store of conscious experience, contributing to the ongoing evolution of awareness itself. This perspective suggests that consciousness is not just something we have, but something we participate in, not just a possession, but a process. Not just a noun, but a verb. Consciousness is something the universe does through us, a way that matter and energy organize themselves to become aware, to experience, and to understand. In this view, studying consciousness becomes not just an academic exercise, but a form of cosmic self-exploration, a way that the universe investigates its own deepest nature. Through consciousness research, we participate in the universe's attempt to understand itself, to comprehend its own capacity for awareness and experience. This cosmic perspective on consciousness provides a sense of meaning and connection that extends beyond individual experience to encompass the larger patterns of existence itself. It suggests that consciousness, rather than being an accidental byproduct of evolution, represents one of the fundamental ways that the universe expresses its own nature. As we rest in this understanding, we can appreciate consciousness as both utterly familiar and profoundly mysterious, both intimately personal and cosmically significant. It's the lens through which we perceive the world and the very capacity for perception itself. The gentle mystery of consciousness continues to unfold through scientific research and personal experience, through objective investigation and subjective exploration. Each approach offers its own insights and perspectives, contributing to our growing understanding of this remarkable phenomenon. Perhaps most importantly, the study of consciousness reminds us of our deep connection to each other and to the larger patterns of existence. Through consciousness, we participate in the universe's capacity for awareness, experience, and understanding. We are not separate from the cosmos, but are the cosmos becoming conscious of itself. This recognition invites a sense of wonder and humility, an appreciation for the remarkable fact that awareness exists at all. In a universe of seemingly unconscious matter and energy, consciousness represents a profound development, a way that the cosmos has learned to experience and understand itself. As you drift into sleep tonight, you can rest in this understanding that consciousness is both the most natural and the most mysterious aspect of existence. It's as fundamental as breathing, as ordinary as waking up each morning, yet as extraordinary as anything in the known universe. Your consciousness is both uniquely yours and universally shared, both intimately personal and cosmically significant. It connects you to every other conscious being and to the larger patterns of existence that gave rise to awareness itself. In the quiet moments before sleep, as consciousness prepares for its nightly journey through different states of awareness, we can appreciate the remarkable gift of being conscious at all. Consciousness is the universe's way of experiencing beauty, understanding truth, and creating meaning. And in this gentle recognition, consciousness reveals itself not as a problem to be solved or a mystery to be eliminated, but as a wonder to be appreciated, a gift to be cherished, and a phenomenon to be explored with both scientific rigor and personal reverence. The mystery remains, and that's as it should be. Some questions are more beautiful for remaining partially unanswered. Some phenomena are more wonderful for retaining their essential mystery. Consciousness is one such phenomenon, a gentle mystery that continues to unfold through both scientific investigation and lived experience, through both objective study and subjective appreciation. As we close this exploration, let consciousness continue its natural rhythm, flowing through its various states of awareness, from waking attention to dreaming imagery, to the deep rest of peaceful sleep. In this natural cycle, consciousness reveals its fundamental nature as a process rather than a thing, a flowing river of awareness rather than a static entity. Rest now in the gentle mystery of consciousness, appreciating both what we know and what remains unknown, both the scientific insights and the personal wonder, both the mechanisms we can measure and the experience we can only live. Consciousness continues its ancient dance, as it has for millions of years, as it will for millions more, carrying forward the universe's remarkable capacity for awareness, experience, and understanding. In this dance of consciousness, you participate in one of existence's most profound achievements, the emergence of awareness from the intricate patterns of matter and energy that constitute your brain and body. Through your consciousness, the universe knows itself, experiences beauty, and contemplates its own mysterious nature. And in this knowing, this experiencing, this contemplating consciousness reveals its deepest secret. It is not separate from the universe, but is the universe awakening to itself, matter becoming aware of matter, existence becoming conscious of existence, the cosmos gently opening its eyes and wondering at its own remarkable capacity for awareness. Sleep well in this gentle understanding, knowing that consciousness continues its eternal dance, weaving through states of awareness, like a river flowing through different landscapes, sometimes rushing with the intensity of focused attention, sometimes meandering through the quiet pools of reflection, sometimes resting in the deep stillness of dreamless sleep. Your consciousness is part of this eternal dance, this cosmic symphony of awareness that plays out across countless minds throughout the universe. Rest now in this gentle participation, this quiet contribution to existence's ongoing project of understanding itself through the remarkable phenomenon we call consciousness. And as consciousness flows through these various states and configurations, we find ourselves approaching one of the most profound questions that science has ever encountered. After decades of research, thousands of experiments, and countless hours of observation, we must acknowledge something both humbling and beautiful. We still don't fully understand what consciousness actually is. This isn't a failure of scientific method. It's simply recognition that consciousness may be asking us to expand our very understanding of what it means to know something scientifically. When we study other phenomena in nature, we can step outside them, observe them objectively, measure them from a distance. But consciousness presents us with a unique challenge. We are trying to understand the very thing we use to understand everything else. Imagine trying to see your own eyes without a mirror. Consciousness is the instrument through which all scientific observation occurs. yet it remains partially hidden from its own scrutiny. This creates what philosophers and scientists call the hard problem of consciousness, a question that continues to gently perplex even our most brilliant researchers. The hard problem isn't about explaining the functions of consciousness. Science has made remarkable progress in understanding how attention works, how memory forms, how sensory information is processed and integrated. These are sometimes called the easy problems of consciousness, though they're anything but easy to solve. They're simply more accessible to traditional scientific methods. The hard problem is deeper, more elusive. It asks not how consciousness works, but why there is subjective experience at all. Why does it feel like something to be conscious? Why is there an inner world of experience that accompanies all the neural processing we can measure and observe? Consider the simple experience of seeing the color red. Scientists can trace the entire pathway from photons entering your eye to electrical signals traveling along your optic nerve to specific patterns of activation in your visual cortex. We can measure each step of this process with extraordinary precision. We understand the wavelengths of light, the neural responses, the brain regions involved. Yet none of this explains why there's something it feels like to experience redness, why there's an inequality to the perception that seems to exist beyond all the measurable neural activity. This felt experience, this subjective quality, is what philosophers call qualia, and it represents the heart of the hard problem. The mystery deepens when we consider that this subjective experience feels immediate and direct, yet science reveals it to be the product of incredibly complex neural processing. The red you experience doesn't exist in the external world. Red is a construction of your visual system, a particular way your brain interprets certain wavelengths of electromagnetic radiation. This constructive nature of consciousness extends to every aspect of experience. The sounds you hear are constructions from pressure waves. The textures you feel are interpretations of nerve signals. Even your sense of having a body, of being located in space, is a neural construction that can be altered by changes in brain activity. Yet, despite being constructions, these experiences feel completely real and immediate. Your brain creates them so seamlessly, so convincingly, that you rarely question their apparent directness. This is one of consciousness's most remarkable achievements, creating the experience of direct contact with reality while actually providing you with sophisticated neural interpretations. The hard problem becomes even more intriguing when we consider individual differences in conscious experience. While the basic mechanisms of consciousness appear to be universal among humans, the specific quality of each person's inner experience may vary in ways we can barely imagine. Your experience of the color blue might be subtly or even dramatically different from mine, yet we would never know this because we use the same word to describe our different internal experiences. This possibility highlights the profound privacy of consciousness, the fact that inner experience remains fundamentally inaccessible to outside observation. Some philosophers and scientists have argued that this privacy means consciousness will always remain partially mysterious, that there are aspects of subjective experience that cannot be captured by objective scientific methods. Others maintain that as our understanding of the brain advances, we will eventually explain consciousness completely in terms of neural mechanisms. This debate touches on fundamental questions about the nature of scientific explanation itself. Can subjective experience be reduced to objective processes, or does consciousness represent a fundamentally different kind of phenomenon that requires new approaches to understanding? Recent advances in neuroscience have brought new perspectives to these ancient questions. Some researchers have proposed that consciousness might be understood as a particular type of information processing, one that integrates information from multiple sources and makes it globally available throughout the brain. This computational approach suggests that consciousness isn't something separate from brain activity, but rather a specific pattern of neural organization. According to this view, any system that processes information in the right way would be conscious, regardless of whether it's made of biological neurons or silicon circuits. Other theories propose that consciousness arises from the brain's capacity to create unified, coherent representations from disparate sources of information. These theories focus on how the brain binds together different types of sensory input, memory traces, and predictions to create the seamless experience of being aware in the present moment. Still, other approaches suggest that consciousness involves the brain's ability to model itself, to create internal representations of its own states and processes. Self-awareness, in this view, emerges when these self-models become sophisticated enough to represent the fact that they are representations. Each of these theories offers valuable insights into how consciousness might work, but none has yet provided a complete account that satisfies all researchers. The field remains vibrant and actively evolving, with new theories and experimental approaches emerging regularly. One particularly intriguing development involves the use of advanced brain imaging techniques to study consciousness in real time. Researchers can now observe the neural processes that accompany conscious experience as they unfold, tracking how information flows through different brain networks and how these patterns change during different states of awareness. These studies have revealed that consciousness involves dynamic, ever-changing patterns of connectivity between brain regions. Rather than being localized to any specific area, consciousness appears to emerge from the coordinated activity of multiple networks working together in complex, synchronized patterns. The timing of this coordination is exquisitely precise, with different brain regions synchronizing their activity on timescales of milliseconds. This synchronization allows information to be shared and integrated across the entire brain, creating the unified experience of conscious awareness. When this synchronization is disrupted, consciousness becomes fragmented or disappears entirely. This happens naturally during sleep, when the coordinated patterns that support waking consciousness give way to different patterns associated with dreaming or dreamless sleep. It also occurs during anesthesia, when drugs specifically target the neural mechanisms that maintain conscious integration. The study of these disruptions has provided valuable insights into the neural requirements for consciousness. It appears that consciousness depends not just on having active neurons, but on having those neurons communicate with each other in specific, organized ways. This understanding has led to new approaches for assessing consciousness in patients who cannot communicate normally. Rather than relying solely on behavioral responses, clinicians can now measure the complexity and integration of brain activity to determine whether consciousness is present, even when it's not obviously expressed. These advances have revealed that consciousness exists on a spectrum, rather than being simply present or absent. Some patients show signs of awareness that are not apparent from their behavior. Others demonstrate complex patterns of brain activity that suggest rich inner experiences despite their inability to respond to external stimuli. The recognition that consciousness can be hidden or covert has profound implications for how we understand and treat patients with disorders of consciousness. It suggests that the inner world of subjective experience may be more resilient than previously thought, persisting even when the usual pathways for expressing consciousness are damaged. This resilience points to something fundamental about the nature of consciousness itself. Rather than being a fragile epiphenomenon that disappears at the first sign of brain damage, consciousness appears to be deeply embedded in the basic organization of neural activity. It may be one of the fundamental ways that complex nervous systems organize themselves. The evolutionary perspective on consciousness supports this view. Consciousness didn't appear suddenly in humans, but evolved gradually over millions of years, building on simpler forms of information, processing, and integration that we can observe in other species. Each step in this evolutionary progression added new capacities while preserving the basic integrative functions that characterize conscious experience. This gradual evolution suggests that consciousness serves important biological functions, that it provides advantages for survival and reproduction that have been preserved by natural selection. the ability to integrate information from multiple sources, to maintain flexible responses to changing circumstances, and to learn from experience all contribute to an organism's ability to thrive in complex environments. Yet, the evolutionary perspective also raises puzzling questions. If consciousness simply allows for more sophisticated information processing, why does it have the subjective quality that it does? Why isn't it simply unconscious computation that achieves the same behavioral outcomes? This question brings us back to the heart of the hard problem. Even if we can explain all the functions that consciousness serves, all the advantages it provides, we still face the mystery of why there is subjective experience at all. The felt quality of being conscious seems to go beyond any functional advantage it might provide. Some researchers have suggested that this subjective quality is simply an inevitable consequence of certain types of information processing, that any system complex enough to integrate information in the way that brains do will necessarily have some form of inner experience. This view implies that consciousness is more widespread than we might expect, potentially present in any sufficiently complex system. Others argue that subjective experience requires specific biological processes that have evolved in living organisms. According to this view, consciousness depends on the particular chemistry and structure of biological neurons and cannot arise in artificial systems, no matter how sophisticated their information processing becomes. The question of whether artificial systems could be conscious remains one of the most intriguing and controversial issues in consciousness research. As computer technology becomes increasingly sophisticated, this question moves from the realm of philosophy into practical consideration. Current artificial intelligence systems can perform many tasks that require apparent understanding, creativity, and even emotional expression. Yet most researchers agree that these systems are not conscious in the sense of having subjective experience. They process information and generate responses without the inner feeling of what it's like to be aware. However, as AI systems become more complex and more capable of integrating information across multiple domains, the question of machine consciousness becomes increasingly relevant. If consciousness really is about information integration and global availability, then sufficiently advanced artificial systems might indeed develop some form of awareness. The possibility of machine consciousness raises profound ethical questions. If artificial systems could experience suffering or pleasure, if they could have inner lives and subjective experiences, then we would need to consider their welfare in the same way we consider the welfare of other conscious beings. These considerations extend our thinking about consciousness beyond the human case to encompass the possibility of awareness in other forms of organization. They invite us to consider consciousness not as a uniquely human phenomenon, but as a more general property that might emerge wherever information is processed and integrated in sufficiently complex ways. This broader perspective on consciousness connects to ancient philosophical traditions that have long suggested that awareness might be a fundamental feature of reality, rather than something that emerges only in biological brains. While these traditions often included metaphysical claims that go beyond current scientific understanding, they share with modern research an appreciation for the profound mystery of consciousness. The scientific approach to consciousness doesn't require us to abandon wonder or mystery. Instead, it invites us to approach these mysteries with careful observation, rigorous experimentation, and healthy skepticism about our own assumptions and limitations. Each scientific discovery about consciousness adds to our understanding while simultaneously revealing new depths to explore. The more we learn about the neural mechanisms of awareness, the more remarkable the phenomenon becomes. The fact that billions of neurons, each following simple electrochemical rules, can give rise to the rich, unified experience of consciousness represents one of the most extraordinary achievements in the natural world. This achievement is ongoing in your own brain right now. As you listen to these words, neural networks are integrating information, binding together sensory inputs, accessing memories, and creating the seamless experience of understanding. Your consciousness is actively constructing your experience of this moment, weaving together multiple streams of information into a unified awareness. The process happens so smoothly, so effortlessly, that you're rarely aware of the incredible complexity involved. Yet beneath the surface of your conscious experience, billions of neural interactions are occurring every second, creating and maintaining the phenomenon of awareness through mechanisms we're only beginning to understand. This ongoing construction of consciousness reveals another important aspect of awareness: its dynamic, ever-changing nature. Consciousness isn't a static state, but a continuous process, constantly updating and renewing itself based on new information and changing circumstances. Each moment of consciousness is unique, influenced by your current sensory input, your memories of the past, your expectations about the future, and the particular pattern of neural activity occurring in your brain at that instant. Yet despite this constant change, consciousness maintains a sense of continuity and coherence that binds your experiences together into a unified stream of awareness. This continuity is itself a construction, created by neural mechanisms that integrate information across time and maintain consistent representations of self and world. When these mechanisms are disrupted, as can happen in certain neurological conditions, the sense of continuity can be lost, leading to fragmented or discontinuous experiences of consciousness. The study of such disruptions has provided valuable insights into how normal consciousness maintains its coherent, unified quality. It appears to depend on the coordinated activity of multiple brain systems working together to create and maintain consistent models of ongoing experience. These models are constantly being updated and refined based on new information, but they're also constrained by prior expectations and beliefs. This creates a delicate balance between flexibility and stability, allowing consciousness to adapt to new situations while maintaining coherent representations of self and world. The balance can sometimes tip too far in either direction. Too much flexibility can lead to chaotic, disorganized conscious experience. Too much stability can result in rigid, inflexible awareness that has difficulty adapting to change. Optimal consciousness seems to require a middle path, maintaining enough stability to create coherent experience, while remaining flexible enough to adapt to new information and changing circumstances. This optimal balance is something that can be cultivated and developed through various practices. Meditation, for example, can enhance the stability and clarity of conscious experience, while also increasing flexibility and adaptability. Different types of meditation produce different effects on consciousness, from increased focused attention to expanded awareness to profound states of unified consciousness. The fact that consciousness can be trained and modified through practice suggests that it's not fixed or immutable, but rather a dynamic process that can be influenced by intention and effort. This plasticity of consciousness has important implications for understanding and treating various mental health conditions that involve alterations in conscious experience. Depression, anxiety, and other psychiatric conditions often involve characteristic patterns of conscious experience, with attention biased towards certain types of information, memory focused on particular themes, and self-awareness dominated by specific narratives or beliefs. Understanding consciousness as a modifiable process opens up new possibilities for therapeutic intervention. Rather than simply treating symptoms with medication, clinicians can potentially help patients develop new patterns of conscious experience through techniques that directly target the mechanisms of awareness. This might involve training attention, modifying thought patterns, or cultivating new forms of self-awareness. The plasticity of consciousness also suggests that our normal waking awareness represents just one possible configuration of conscious experience. Through various practices and techniques, it's possible to access other states of consciousness that reveal different aspects of awareness and provide new perspectives on the nature of mind and reality. These altered states, whether achieved through meditation, sensory deprivation, or other means can provide valuable insights into the mechanisms and possibilities of consciousness. They demonstrate that awareness is far more flexible and varied than our ordinary experience might suggest. Yet even as we explore these various states and configurations of consciousness, the fundamental mystery remains. We can map the neural correlates, identify the brain networks, measure the patterns of activity, and develop sophisticated theories about how consciousness works. But the subjective quality of experience, the felt sense of what it's like to be aware, continues to elude complete scientific explanation. This isn't necessarily a problem to be solved, but perhaps a mystery to be appreciated. Some aspects of reality may be more beautiful for remaining partially mysterious, more wonderful for retaining their essential enigma. Consciousness may be one such phenomenon, forever fascinating because it touches on the deepest questions about the nature of existence itself. The mystery of consciousness connects us to fundamental questions about the relationship between mind and matter, between subjective experience and objective reality, between the inner world of awareness and the external world of science. These questions have puzzled human beings for millennia and continue to challenge our understanding today. Yet rather than being a source of frustration, this ongoing mystery can be a source of wonder and inspiration. It reminds us that despite all our scientific advances, there are still profound aspects of existence that we're only beginning to understand. It keeps alive a sense of curiosity and humility about the nature of reality and our place within it. The study of consciousness also reminds us of our deep connection to the larger patterns of existence. Through consciousness, matter has learned to experience itself. The universe has developed the capacity for self-awareness, and existence has become conscious of its own nature. We are not separate observers of reality, but rather expressions of reality's own capacity for awareness and understanding. This perspective invites a sense of participation rather than separation, an understanding that we are part of the very phenomenon we're trying to understand. Through our consciousness, the universe examines its own capacity for awareness. Through our scientific investigations, existence explores its own deepest mysteries. In this view, consciousness research becomes not just an academic pursuit, but a form of cosmic self-exploration, a way that reality investigates its own nature through the particular configurations of matter and energy that constitute conscious beings like ourselves. The gentle unfolding of this investigation continues in laboratories around the world, in the quiet observations of contemplatives, and in the direct experience of conscious beings everywhere. Each moment of awareness contributes to the ongoing exploration of consciousness, adding to the universe's understanding of its own capacity for experience and awareness. As you rest in this understanding, you can appreciate your own consciousness as both utterly ordinary and profoundly extraordinary. It's as natural as breathing, as routine as waking up each morning, yet as remarkable as any phenomenon in the known universe. Your awareness right now represents billions of years of evolutionary development, countless neural processes working in exquisite coordination, and the mysterious emergence of subjective experience from objective processes. It connects you to every other conscious being and to the larger patterns of existence that gave rise to awareness itself. The scientific study of consciousness continues to advance, bringing new discoveries and insights with each passing year. New technologies reveal ever more detailed pictures of brain activity during conscious and unconscious states. New theories provide fresh frameworks for understanding how awareness might arise from neural processes. New experiments test specific predictions about the nature and mechanisms of consciousness. Yet with each advance, the mystery seems to deepen rather than diminish. Each answer reveals new questions. Each insight opens up new puzzles to explore. This isn't a limitation, but rather a testament to the profound richness and complexity of conscious experience. The gentle mystery of consciousness invites us to approach it with both scientific rigor and personal wonder, with both objective investigation and subjective appreciation. It reminds us that we are part of something larger than ourselves, participants in existence's ongoing project of self-understanding. In quiet moments like this, when we turn our attention to consciousness itself, we participate in this cosmic self-reflection. We become the universe examining its own capacity for awareness, matter contemplating its own ability to experience and understand. There's something profoundly beautiful about this recursive quality of consciousness, this ability of awareness to become aware of itself. As the night deepens and consciousness prepares for its journey through sleep, we can rest in this gentle understanding. Consciousness continues its ancient dance, flowing through states of awareness like water through different landscapes, sometimes rushing with focused attention, sometimes meandering through quiet reflection, sometimes resting in the deep stillness of peaceful sleep. Your consciousness is part of this eternal dance, this cosmic symphony of awareness that plays out across countless minds throughout the universe. In sleep, consciousness doesn't disappear, but transforms, taking on new qualities and exploring different dimensions of experience. Dreams reveal consciousness's capacity to create rich, vivid experiences entirely from internal neural activity. Deep sleep demonstrates consciousness's ability to rest and restore itself, preparing for new cycles of awareness. Even in the deepest unconsciousness, the potential for awareness remains, ready to emerge when conditions are right. This cyclical nature of consciousness reflects larger patterns in nature, from the daily rhythms of light and darkness to the seasonal cycles of growth and rest. Consciousness participates in these cosmic rhythms, flowing through its own cycles of activity and rest, awareness and restoration. As you settle into sleep tonight, you can appreciate consciousness as one of existence's most gentle and mysterious processes. It asks nothing from you, but awareness itself, requires no effort beyond the simple fact of being conscious. It flows through you naturally, effortlessly, carrying forward billions of years of evolutionary wisdom and cosmic development. In sleep, consciousness continues its quiet work of integration and restoration, processing the day's experiences, consolidating memories, and preparing for new cycles of awareness. Even in rest, consciousness remains one of the universe's most remarkable achievements, a gentle miracle that continues moment by moment, breath by breath, dream by dream. Rest now in this understanding that consciousness is both utterly natural and completely mysterious, both as familiar as your own thoughts and as vast as the cosmos itself. It connects you to every moment of awareness that has ever existed, and to every conscious being that shares in this gentle mystery of existence. Sleep peacefully, knowing that consciousness will continue its eternal dance, weaving through states of awareness like a river flowing through endless landscapes, carrying forward the universe's precious capacity for experience, understanding, and wonder. In this dance, you participate in one of existence's deepest mysteries, the gentle miracle of being aware at all. As consciousness flows through these rhythms of rest and restoration, we find ourselves drawn to consider what happens when this delicate process encounters disruption. Not the dramatic interruptions we might imagine, but the subtle shifts and changes that reveal consciousness's remarkable adaptability and resilience. Consider what occurs during those moments when you're drifting off to sleep and suddenly jolt awake, your heart beating faster, your mind suddenly alert. This phenomenon, known as a hypnic jerk, offers a gentle window into the complex transitions that consciousness navigates every night. Your brain, in the process of shutting down its wakeful systems, sometimes experiences a brief miscommunication, a moment when different neural networks aren't quite synchronized in their journey towards sleep. These small disruptions are completely normal, part of the intricate dance that consciousness performs as it moves between different states. They remind us that consciousness isn't a simple on-off switch, but rather a sophisticated system with many moving parts, each requiring precise coordination to function smoothly. The study of such natural variations has helped scientists understand that consciousness operates more like a symphony than a solo performance. Multiple brain networks must work in harmony, each contributing their own specialized function to the overall experience of awareness. When one section of this neural orchestra is slightly out of sync, we might experience these brief moments of disruption, but consciousness demonstrates remarkable resilience in the face of such challenges. The brain has evolved sophisticated mechanisms for maintaining coherent awareness, even when individual components aren't functioning perfectly. This redundancy and flexibility help ensure that consciousness can continue even when faced with various forms of stress or interference. This adaptability becomes even more apparent when we examine how consciousness responds to more significant challenges. People who work night shifts, for example, must gradually retrain their consciousness to operate on schedules that go against their natural circadian rhythms. Through patience and consistency, the brain learns to adapt, shifting its patterns of alertness and rest to accommodate new demands. The process isn't always smooth. Shift workers often experience periods of confusion or disorientation as their consciousness adjusts to new patterns. But with time, the brain's remarkable plasticity allows it to establish new rhythms, creating stable patterns of awareness that work within altered schedules. This flexibility extends to many other aspects of conscious experience. People who lose their hearing often develop enhanced visual awareness, their consciousness adapting to rely more heavily on information from their remaining senses. Those who become blind frequently show increased sensitivity to sound and touch, their awareness reorganizing itself to make the most of available sensory input. These adaptations happen gradually, through the slow process of neural plasticity. The brain doesn't simply flip a switch to create new patterns of consciousness. Instead, it gradually strengthens certain connections while allowing others to weaken, slowly reshaping the networks that support conscious experience. The remarkable thing about these adaptations is that they often happen without conscious effort or intention. The brain automatically reorganizes itself based on the information it receives and the demands placed upon it. Consciousness, in a sense, learns to make the best of whatever circumstances it encounters. This automatic adaptation reflects something profound about the nature of consciousness itself. Rather than being a rigid, unchanging phenomenon, consciousness appears to be inherently flexible, constantly adjusting and optimizing itself based on experience and circumstance. The study of meditation provides another beautiful example of consciousness's adaptability. Long-term practitioners often report profound changes in their everyday awareness, describing enhanced clarity, improved emotional regulation, and a greater sense of inner peace. Brain imaging studies confirm that these subjective changes correspond to measurable alterations in neural structure and function. The changes don't happen overnight. Like any form of learning, meditation involves the gradual strengthening of certain neural pathways and the development of new patterns of brain activity. Over months and years of practice, consciousness slowly transforms, developing new capacities and qualities that weren't present before. What's particularly fascinating is that these changes seem to persist even when people aren't actively meditating. The brain appears to maintain these new patterns of organization as its default mode of operation, suggesting that consciousness can be genuinely transformed through sustained practice. Different types of meditation produce different patterns of change. Practices focused on concentration tend to strengthen networks involved in sustained attention. Mindfulness practices enhance areas associated with present moment awareness and emotional regulation. Loving-kindness meditation affects regions involved in empathy and social connection. These specific effects suggest that consciousness is not a monolithic phenomenon, but rather consists of multiple components that can be trained and modified independently. Like physical fitness, which involves different aspects such as strength, endurance, and flexibility, consciousness appears to have various dimensions that can be developed through appropriate practice. The recognition that consciousness can be trained has important implications for understanding mental health and well-being. Many psychological difficulties involve characteristic patterns of conscious experience. Depression often includes persistent negative thinking and rumination. Anxiety involves excessive focus on potential threats and dangers. ADHD can involve difficulties with sustained attention and working memory. Understanding these conditions as involving specific patterns of conscious experience opens up new possibilities for treatment. Rather than simply managing symptoms through medication, therapists can help people develop new patterns of awareness that support greater mental health and well-being. Cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, teaches people to recognize and modify automatic thought patterns that contribute to emotional distress. Mindfulness-based interventions help people develop greater awareness of their present moment experience and less reactivity to difficult thoughts and emotions. These approaches work by gradually reshaping the patterns of neural activity that underlie conscious experience. Through repeated practice, people can learn to direct their attention more skillfully, respond to emotions more wisely, and maintain greater awareness of their ongoing mental processes. The effectiveness of such approaches provides further evidence for consciousness's inherent plasticity. The same mechanisms that allow consciousness to adapt to hearing loss or shift work can be harnessed intentionally to promote greater psychological health and resilience. This brings us to consider consciousness's relationship with learning and memory more broadly. Every experience you have, every skill you acquire, every memory you form subtly changes the patterns of connectivity in your brain and, consequently, the quality of your conscious experience. When you learn to ride a bicycle, for example, you're not just acquiring a motor skill, you're also developing new forms of spatial awareness, balance perception, and the ability to integrate multiple sources of sensory information in real time. These changes become part of your ongoing conscious experience, subtly altering how you perceive and interact with the world. The same is true for more abstract forms of learning. When you master a new language, you're not just memorizing vocabulary and grammar rules. You're developing new ways of thinking and perceiving, new patterns of consciousness that allow you to understand and express ideas in different ways. These learning-induced changes in consciousness help explain why education and experience have such profound effects on how people see and understand the world. Two people with different backgrounds and training may look at the same situation and have genuinely different conscious experiences of what they're observing. A trained musician listening to a symphony will have a conscious experience rich with awareness of harmony, rhythm, instrumental technique, and compositional structure. Someone without musical training might have an equally valid but very different conscious experience focused on the emotional impact and overall aesthetic impression of the music. Neither experience is more correct than the other. They simply reflect different ways that consciousness can organize and interpret the same sensory information. The musician's training has created neural networks that automatically pass musical information in sophisticated ways, while the untrained listener's brain focuses on different aspects of the auditory experience. This variability in conscious experience highlights something important about the nature of perception itself. We often assume that we're directly perceiving the world as it actually is, but neuroscience reveals that consciousness is always interpreting and constructing our experience based on available information and prior learning. The colors you see, the sounds you hear, the textures you feel are all constructions created by your nervous system based on patterns of neural activity. The external world provides the raw material, but consciousness shapes that material into the rich, meaningful experience of perception. This constructive process happens so seamlessly and convincingly that we rarely question it. The brain creates the illusion of direct, immediate contact with reality when it's actually providing us with sophisticated interpretations based on sensory input, memory, and prediction. Understanding perception as a constructive process helps explain many puzzling aspects of conscious experience. It explains why optical illusions work, why memory can be unreliable, and why different people can have genuinely different experiences of the same situation. It also reveals something profound about consciousness's relationship to reality. Rather than being a passive mirror that reflects the external world, consciousness is an active process that creates our experience of reality based on the brain's best interpretation of available information. This doesn't mean that reality is purely subjective or that there's no external world independent of consciousness. The brain's interpretations are constrained by real patterns in the environment, and these constraints ensure that conscious experience, while constructed, remains grounded in objective features of the world. But it does mean that consciousness provides us with a particular kind of interface with reality, one that's been shaped by evolution to serve the needs of organisms like ourselves. Other species, with different sensory capabilities and environmental challenges, likely experience forms of consciousness quite different from our own. A bat's consciousness, for example, is probably dominated by the rich three-dimensional world created by echolocation, a form of awareness that we can barely imagine. A dog's conscious experience likely includes olfactory information of extraordinary richness and complexity, creating a world of sense and chemical signals that remains largely inaccessible to human awareness. These differences in conscious experience reflect the diverse ways that nervous systems can organize and interpret information. Consciousness, rather than being a single, universal phenomenon, appears to be a flexible process that can take many different forms depending on the particular requirements and capabilities of the organism that generates it. This diversity extends beyond species differences to individual variations within species. While all healthy humans share the same basic architecture for consciousness, the specific patterns of connectivity and activity that support awareness vary from person to person based on genetics, experience, and learning. These individual differences help explain why people can have such varied responses to the same situation, why some individuals are naturally more sensitive to certain types of stimulation, and why consciousness can feel so personal and unique to each individual. Yet despite this individual variation, there are certain universal features of human consciousness that appear to be shared across cultures and individuals. The integration of sensory information into unified perceptions, the binding of experiences across time to create continuity, and the capacity for self-reflection and meta-awareness seem to emerge reliably from human neural architecture. These universal features suggest that consciousness, while flexible in its specific content and quality, follows certain organizing principles that are deeply embedded in the structure and function of the human brain. These principles have been refined through millions of years of evolution to create the remarkable phenomenon of human awareness. The evolutionary perspective on consciousness provides valuable insights into why awareness has the particular characteristics it does. Each feature of consciousness that we've explored serves important functions for survival and reproduction, which explains why these capacities have been preserved and enhanced through evolutionary time. The ability to integrate information from multiple senses helps organisms create accurate representations of their environment. The capacity to maintain attention and focus allows for effective goal pursuit and problem solving. Self-awareness enables social cooperation and the ability to learn from others' experiences. Even the seemingly mysterious subjective quality of consciousness may serve important functions. The rich, felt experience of being aware might enhance learning and memory by making experiences more vivid and memorable. It might also facilitate social bonding by creating the capacity for empathy and emotional connection with others. The evolutionary perspective also helps us understand consciousness's limitations and quirks. The selective nature of attention makes sense when we consider that consciousness evolved to handle the most relevant information rather than processing unlimited amounts of data. The constructive nature of perception is efficient because it allows the brain to make reasonable assumptions about the world based on partial information. These evolutionary considerations remind us that consciousness, for all its remarkable sophistication, is ultimately a biological process shaped by the same forces that have molded all life on Earth. It's not separate from nature, but is one of nature's most elegant achievements, a way that matter and energy have learned to become aware of themselves. This natural perspective on consciousness invites a sense of wonder rather than mystery, appreciation rather than confusion. Consciousness emerges from the same physical laws that govern all phenomena in the universe, yet it gives rise to the rich, subjective world of experience that makes existence meaningful and beautiful. As we consider consciousness from this natural perspective, we can appreciate it as both utterly ordinary and completely extraordinary. It's as natural as any biological process, following the same principles of chemistry and physics that govern all matter and energy. Yet it creates the inner world of experience that allows for beauty, meaning, love, and understanding. The ordinariness of consciousness doesn't diminish its wonder. If anything, the fact that such remarkable phenomena can arise through natural processes makes consciousness even more extraordinary. The universe has evolved the capacity to know itself through the particular configurations of matter and energy that constitute conscious beings. This self-knowing aspect of consciousness connects us to the larger cosmic story of which we're all a part. Through our awareness, the universe experiences itself from countless different perspectives, each one unique, yet connected to the larger whole. In quiet moments like this, when we turn our attention to consciousness itself, we participate in this cosmic self-reflection. We become expressions of the universe's capacity for self-awareness, temporary configurations of matter and energy through which existence contemplates its own nature. This perspective invites humility and wonder rather than pride or separation. We're not separate from the natural world, but are expressions of its deepest potentials, manifestations of matter's capacity to become aware, to experience, and to understand. The scientific study of consciousness continues this cosmic project of self-understanding. Through careful observation and rigorous experimentation, consciousness investigates its own nature, seeking to understand the mechanisms and principles that give rise to awareness itself. Each discovery adds to this growing understanding while simultaneously revealing new depths to explore. The more we learn about consciousness, the more remarkable it becomes. The more we appreciate the extraordinary achievement it represents within the natural world. Yet even as our scientific understanding advances, consciousness retains its essential mystery. The subjective quality of experience, the felt sense of what it's like to be aware, continues to elude complete explanation. This isn't necessarily a problem, but perhaps a feature of consciousness itself. Some phenomena may be more beautiful for remaining partially mysterious, more wonderful for retaining their essential enigma. Consciousness may be one such phenomenon, forever fascinating because it touches on the deepest questions about the nature of existence and our place within it. The mystery doesn't diminish the value of scientific investigation, but rather adds to it a sense of wonder and humility. We approach consciousness with both rigorous methodology and reverent appreciation, seeking to understand while remaining open to awe. As you rest in this gentle exploration, you can appreciate consciousness as both the most familiar and the most mysterious aspect of your existence. It's the foundation of everything you know and experience, yet it remains one of the deepest puzzles in all of science. This duality reflects consciousness's unique position at the intersection of the objective and subjective worlds. It bridges the gap between the physical universe described by science and the inner world of experience that makes life meaningful and beautiful. Through consciousness, matter becomes aware of matter, energy becomes conscious of energy, and existence develops the capacity to know and appreciate itself. This is perhaps consciousness's greatest achievement, not just creating awareness, but creating the possibility of wonder, understanding, and love. As the night deepens and consciousness prepares for its journey through sleep, we can rest in this appreciation, Consciousness continues its ancient work of integration and awareness, flowing through its natural cycles of activity and rest, always maintaining the delicate balance that sustains the miracle of being aware. Your consciousness is part of this eternal process, this ongoing expression of the universe's capacity for self-awareness. In sleep, it doesn't disappear, but transforms, exploring different dimensions of experience while maintaining the essential continuity that binds your moments of awareness together. Dreams reveal consciousness's creative power, its ability to generate rich, meaningful experiences from internal neural activity. The deep rest of dreamless sleep demonstrates consciousness's wisdom, its capacity to restore and renew itself for new cycles of awareness. Even in the deepest unconsciousness, the potential for awareness remains, woven into the very fabric of your neural architecture, ready to emerge when conditions allow. This potential is itself remarkable. A kind of consciousness in waiting, a capacity for experience that persists, even when not actively manifest. The cyclical nature of consciousness reflects larger rhythms in the natural world, from the rotation of planets to the pulsing of stars. Consciousness participates in these cosmic cycles, flowing through its own patterns of expansion and contraction, activity and rest, awareness and renewal. As you settle into this natural rhythm tonight, you can appreciate consciousness as one of nature's most gentle and persistent processes. It requires no effort from you beyond the simple fact of being present, no struggle beyond the natural ease of existing. Consciousness flows through you like a gentle river, carrying forward billions of years of evolutionary wisdom, countless moments of awareness, and the accumulated experience of being human in this remarkable universe. It connects you to every conscious being that has ever existed, and to the ongoing story of awareness itself. In this connection, you rest not as an isolated individual, but as a participant in consciousness's larger journey, a temporary expression of the universe's capacity for self-awareness, a gentle wave in the infinite ocean of existence, becoming conscious of itself. Sleep peacefully in this understanding, knowing that consciousness will continue its eternal dance, weaving through states of awareness like light through water, carrying forward the precious gift of experience through the endless cycles of rest and renewal. The mystery remains, and that's as it should be. In its gentle persistence, consciousness reminds us that some questions are more beautiful for remaining open, some phenomena more wonderful for retaining their essential depth and complexity. Rest now in this soft mystery, this gentle miracle of being aware at all, knowing that consciousness will guard your rest and guide your dreams, maintaining its quiet vigil through the peaceful hours of night, ready to greet you with renewed awareness when morning comes. In the flowing rhythm of breath and heartbeat, in the soft transition between waking and sleeping, consciousness reveals its most essential nature, not as a problem to be solved or a mystery to be conquered, but as a gift to be appreciated, a wonder to be experienced, and a gentle miracle that continues, moment by moment, through all the cycles of existence. Your awareness right now, even as it prepares to rest, represents one of the universe's most precious achievements, a delicate flowering of matter's capacity to know itself, to experience beauty, and to participate in the ongoing story of existence, becoming conscious of its own remarkable nature. Sleep well, gentle traveler, in the soft embrace of consciousness as it carries you through the peaceful territories of rest, renewal, and dreams, always maintaining its quiet presence, always ready to welcome you back to the waking world with the gift of renewed awareness and the continuing miracle of being consciously alive in this extraordinary universe. And so we come to rest at the end of this gentle journey through the landscapes of consciousness, having traveled together through the intricate territories of awareness, attention, and the remarkable mystery of being awake to experience it all. We've explored the neural networks that weave together your thoughts, the delicate timing that creates your unified sense of the present moment, and the evolutionary story that brought consciousness into being over millions of years. Throughout this exploration, we've seen that consciousness remains both intimately familiar and beautifully mysterious. Science has illuminated many of the mechanisms that support awareness, from the precise coordination of brain regions to the complex integration of sensory information. We understand more than ever before about how attention shapes experience, how memory constructs the sense of self, and how consciousness adapts and changes throughout the cycles of sleeping and waking. Yet the deepest questions remain gently unanswered. The hard problem of consciousness, the question of why there is subjective experience at all, continues to invite wonder and humility from researchers around the world. The felt quality of being aware, the inner texture of your thoughts and sensations, the simple fact that there is something it's like to be you, these aspects of consciousness remain as mysterious as they are immediate. Perhaps this is as it should be. In a universe of remarkable phenomena, consciousness stands as one of the most gentle and persistent mysteries, a phenomenon that bridges the objective world of science and the subjective world of personal experience. It reminds us that some questions are more beautiful for remaining partially open, some aspects of existence more wonderful for retaining their essential depth and complexity. As you drift into sleep tonight, you carry with you the quiet recognition that consciousness is both utterly natural and completely extraordinary. It flows through you as easily as breathing, yet represents one of the most sophisticated achievements in the natural world. In your awareness, the universe has found a way to know itself, to experience beauty and meaning, and to wonder at its own remarkable nature. Rest peacefully in this gentle mystery, knowing that consciousness will continue its eternal dance, carrying you through the soft territories of dreams and deep sleep, always maintaining its quiet presence, always ready to welcome you back to waking awareness with the continuing gift of being consciously alive in this extraordinary cosmos.